Welcome back. This is the Scaling Secrets Podcast. We're here with Pete Senna from digitalsurgeons.com. Now, Pete is a visionary entrepreneur. He has a background in creating businesses and shaping brands. He has a passion for innovation, a growth mindset, a forward-thinking approach. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means marketing, branding, entrepreneurship, Web3, AI, Metaverse, and so much more. So Pete is going to be talking to us about, he has a podcast called Forward Obsessed, and he's going to be telling us about his entrepreneurial journey and his focus and his successes. So Pete, how the heck are you?
Doing good, Robert. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. And so we gave you a little introduction, we hyped you up, but it's always better to hear directly from the source. So what are you up to these days? What's your passion and focus? What's the elevator pitch about Mr. Pete?
Mr. Pete, I love that. So I have this deep-seated belief that creativity and curiosity is broken. I think it's broken in people's lives. I think it's broken in people's businesses. And what I've noticed, having been in entrepreneurship and business building for 20 years at this point, is that when people live more creative, curious lives, they seem more fulfilled, they seem happier, and ironically, most of the most successful people I know are extremely creative and curious. So I'm on a mission to help be the mentor that I needed 20 years ago that I didn't have, and that's ultimately what I'm up to these days. Is that comes in a lot of different formats, right? So sometimes it comes in the format of an advisor. Sometimes I'm an investor in some of these companies. I do a lot of angel investing. I get brought in a lot of times as a fractional executive, typically a chief marketing or a chief creative executive, where I'll come in and help people to turn their goals and visions into action and make sure that they can grow their business. So a little bit broad, but that's the sort of big picture thing there. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And broad and big picture is great because that gives us all sorts of choices about what to pick up on. And we want to embrace this idea of creative curiosity, right? You want some of that Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg energy where guys like that will go to a cabin for a 3-day weekend and bring a stack of 50 books and learn all sorts of things and get all sorts of insights, but at the same time, they won't be pulled on in sorts of different directions, right? They will use that productively, or they'll use that to kind of enrich themselves and be happy. So how can we be curious and creative without being all scatterbrained and having all sorts of half-finished ideas?
Yeah. So I think action is the answer to the question. I think you got to make sure that the information you're taking in, you're actually going to put to action. So what I like to say to people is that you've got to have, for me, I call it my second brain, which is I use different tools that will help me kind of store information. So the more that we store information in our brain, the more they have to remember it. It's like RAM in a computer. You only have so much of it, right? So anything I have to sort of like come across, whether it's a book I'm reading or a website I check out or a file I'm reading about, whatever, a PDF, whatever, I'll store that somewhere into like my second brain. I use tools like Notion or My Mind to do that, just to get a little bit more tactical. But to answer the question, what I think is super important in a lot of cases for people is you got to ask yourself that big why question. What are you ultimately trying to get to? What is the purpose, right? So the thing I always tell people is the number one highest selling section of the bookstore is the self-help section. And it's because what do? Self-help is like, read the diet book, we read the self-help book, and we finish it and we go deep breath. Oh, that was so great. And we don't do anything about it, right? We go grab the next self-help book, we grab the next fad diet, but we don't put in the work. And I think that it's the perspiration that matters most. I always say perspiration is greater than inspiration because that's what's going to lead to the actions to make it happen. So I think I myself know what it's like to have more ideas than I have time to execute. That's, I think, pretty natural for most people. And I think that just how you consume and take action on the information that you have, I think starts with just like that big why question. So that's what I would say to that.
Wonderful. So we need to know what our why is, and then also make use of that second brain, make use of the Notion or some other tool to get the ideas written down, so that way we can be curious and we can learn these things. And we also need to, you're saying, don't mistake motion for action. Like you can read things, and that's great, and that is an accomplishment of sorts, but that is not the accomplishment. The real accomplishment is going out and implementing and acting and getting some things actually done and complete based on what you learned. And sometimes I kind of tell myself, like what's my expectation here, right? Like if I learn something new, I'll take a walk and I'll fire up the YouTube and I'll just like put on some like 40-minute tutorial about something, and I'll just learn something new. And my expectation will be like, okay, I'm just kind of on the surface level here. I just want to be like aware of some of these things that are possible. And I'm not kidding myself and thinking that I'm taking action. It's just like sometimes I'm just kind of learning or getting ready to take action later once the current obligations are kind of swept out of the way. And so you kind of help all these businesses in the different ways, like you have like the fractional role and things like that. And so where do you see businesses stuck these days, and where do you like to help out?
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses are really stuck with deeply knowing who their customer is and knowing the value that they deliver to the customer, right? So what a lot of founders will say is like, you got to know the problem you're solving, product market fit, blah, blah, blah. And that's all fine, well, and good. But what I always say to people is whether you're like a small mom and pop vegan pizzeria or whether you're a Fortune 50 company, if you really know the problem you solve for your customers, like what value you deliver, what they rely on you for, it makes everything a lot easier. It makes your marketing easier, your sales easier, your product innovation easier. So I think just getting to that clarity of like, who, I would say like who before how. And then once you know the who, then you can understand the what and the how. That's what I tell people a lot.
I love that. So know the who first, and then that sort of helps you figure out the how. And you're tapping into something really interesting because it's easy to forget this, right? It's easy to go and create a business, put out the products and the offers, and then get caught into this weird trap of like, well, is it about me and what am I doing? And are they like learning from me? Are they getting something from me? So you're saying get really clear about that customer avatar. And don't we hate that phrase, right? But it's like know who you're helping and what they're getting out of you, what the value is, and that way you can kind of know what worked and repeat that and scale that. And so this is the Scaling Secrets podcast, right? And we're all about kind of knowing about what these tips are. And sometimes people say, like, scaling has helped me so much with the mindset or hiring the right people, or like what you're mentioning of kind of knowing your market and letting that fuel you. And so, like, what do you have to say about scaling? Like, where have you struggled and where have you succeeded?
Yeah, well, I think the first place that I've really struggled with scale, going back, I don't know, 15 years ago when I was building one of my first businesses, is you have to know what scale means to you, right? So I think that scale is different for everybody, right? Some people, scale is the amount of customers that they have, the amount of team members they have, the revenue, the profit. Like, what are you trying to scale? Market share, like understanding the metrics. What I would say is like what gets measured gets managed, what gets managed gets done, right? So you have to really focus on that. In my experience, I think that my superpower is in branding and storytelling. So what I see a lot of people not getting right is telling the right story to the right audience at the right time on the right channels. And if you're not constantly acquiring new customers and serving the customers that you have, then you run into a situation where you're either not acquiring enough new customers or you're losing more customers than you're keeping. And in a lot of ways, like, business is pretty simple. It's understanding what you're trying to grow. And then when you know what you're trying to grow, I think what a lot of people try to do is they try to do too many things. Whereas what I always say is like, look at what's working in your business, look at where you're trying to get to, and figure out, okay, like for example, if you've got 10 customers and you want to get to 20, how did you get the 10 customers? What can you do? So don't focus on all the new things you can do or the new things you might be able to try. Focus on what's already working and just be better at that. And what I've said, it sounds really stupid even hearing it, but like that's some real lessons that have really worked with me is like the best advice for scaling any business, whether you're a software as a service startup or, a mom and pop business, is look at what's working, what's not working, and just double down on what is working. And a lot of times that opens up new clues, and success leaves clues in a lot of cases if you pay attention.
I love that. And there's nothing wrong with the stupidly simple lessons or the just knowing what worked for you and repeating that. It's so easy to skip over that and then just make your life and your business way more harder than it has to be for yourself. And so I'm remembering what you're saying here. You're saying to have the right story at the right time to the right audience at the right channel. And you're also making me realize that it's easy to fall into that black and white thinking of saying like, oh, I did this to make my 10 customers and, I want to do something new, but it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? It's like it can be a blend of the old and the new. You're looking back and playing detective and you're seeing what works, and then you're figuring out these metrics, these KPIs, you're making your dashboard. That way you're on the right track and you can then kind of do more of what already worked, and it kind of is like a blend of the old and the new. It doesn't have to be boring, and it can be exciting. And so how do we tap into the sort of excitement? If someone says, oh, I have to build a business and I have to, run ads and I have to call customers and hire people and build a team, it can be really easy to get bored or discouraged or burnt out or something like that. So how do we kind of keep the magic going? How do we be excited and energized, and just how can we build and scale a business that makes us alive?
Yeah. I'll read you a quote because it's on my wall behind this thing. So I'm going to look up and read it because I read it 20 times a day, which is: success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. It's a Winston Churchill quote, and I'm not like a big Winston Churchill fan by any means, but that quote like sticks with me, which is like, the people that I've seen succeed know where they're trying to get to. They have a very clear vision of what that looks like, what that feels like in their head or heart. And that's the thing that keeps them going, right? It's that purpose, it's that vision that keeps you going on the really hard days. And it's about getting, 1% better every single day. And it sounds really obvious, but I think what ends up happening a lot of times is, the first thing you said is, I got to build a business, I got to build a team, I got to do these things. That's actually not true. In some cases, I think what people don't realize is that it's not just them, right? If you want to go further, don't go alone. Figure out a way to enlist in a partner or a co-founder or other people that believe in that vision that you have, so that you can drive things forward. And if you've already got a business going and you're trying to grow it, if you're trying to do it all, then you're working in the business, not on the business. And I think that the difference between a solopreneur and an entrepreneur is that a solopreneur is by themselves. And if you're in that situation, obviously you got to do it all at that point, unless you can afford to buy back your time and hire an assistant or hire some people to help you with that. And I know what that's like, because I was a solopreneur for a few years before I started hiring people and before I started growing things. I think when I finally realized that I didn't have to do it all, and more importantly, I couldn't do it all, when I realized that and I woke up to that, that's when I started to really scale. I started to realize that, it's not a good use of my time to do this particular task that I can pay someone to do for $25 an hour or $30 an hour or whatever it was. And I think when you start to give away your Legos, as they say, in terms of like finding the things that need to get done in your business, but figure out not how you're going to get them done, but who's going to get them done for you, that ultimately is where I think you create leverage. And I think that the greatest entrepreneurs understand the power of leverage and how they can leverage that desire and demand to start growing their business. So that's what I would say to start is, like, rather than getting overwhelmed with all the things that you have to do, really focus on like, what are the basic principles of your business? It doesn't matter what kind of business it is. Like, how do you make revenue? What does it cost to deliver that service or product? What is your profit margin, right? The most important thing in a business is revenue minus cost equals profit, right? Like, at the most simple level. People forget about those easy things a lot of times. They get kind of high on their own supply. They get focused on too many things, and they get stuck in their own way. And they think that reading books or watching YouTube videos or scrolling TikTok or watching Netflix is going to solve the problem, when the reality is just doing the work is what's going to solve the problem. And sometimes for some people, doing the work means, hiring people or getting some coaching or, hiring an agency or a partner that can help take that ad thing off your plate if you're not good at ads. What I tell people a lot of times, Robert, is find your superpower, find the things that you uniquely do great, and lean into that. And, some people call it the zone of genius, where you're like focused on the things that give you energy that you love to do. That's what I would say is the place to focus, because when you're trying to do it all, you end up doing a lot of things in a really like mediocre way.
I love that. And this is amazing to think about, and I can tell that you are a go back to basics guy, which is, I think, what a lot of us need. And so I'm digesting a lot of what you were mentioning there. And the first thing you said was, it was sort of meta in a way, right? You said that you are all about knowing what that ultimate goal is and knowing what that vision is, and that way it'll carry you through. And at the same time, you said, hey, let me look up at that quote on the wall, and that's like kind of in a way, like an implementation of that, of just having these kind of visual reminders, visual goals. And you are an AI expert and type of person, and you're making me think that even just the other day, I was working on some project, and I was talking to ChatGPT, and I was like, can you help me figure out this outline for this book? And I got a little stuck, and I said, you know what, ChatGPT, can you list me like 10 affirmations about how excited I'll be when this is done. And can you give me a few words of encouragement that I can read and repeat aloud and maybe even print out and keep by the nightstand, and just like tell me some of these things to just really like internalize and just get me excited about the possibilities to get me over that hump and to kind of open my mind about the goals we can get to and the people that can help us out. And you mentioned that about how important it is to build this team. Don't just go it alone, because when you go it alone, then you'll be the bottleneck. And if you think about it, it's sort of greedy, right? If you're just that total solopreneur, you're hogging all the money to yourself, you're hogging all the time to yourself, and give some of that away. Have other people do some of the work. That way you can have the out of business experience a little bit and look at those tasks and see how they're being done and look at the bigger picture. And that way you can kind of not just be having that super close, like, narrow, nearsighted vision. You can just look at all these other things that are happening and make it work a lot better. And so these are all amazing things to think about that we need to kind of get back to basics and look at. You said about the profit and your cost and what's going on in the middle there. And so there's a lot of just basics that we need to get back into. And, there's so much to think about as far as ideas, but what's really fun, especially on a podcast, is to jump into some stories. So you work with all these companies. Do you have a fun sort of success story case study to share with us that kind of demonstrates the magic that you put into businesses?
100%. And I'm going to share that in 1 second. But before I do that, I want to get really tactical and practical with the audience here. You said, how do you scale? The number one greatest way to scale any business is to scale yourself, right? And I want to be really clear. So I'm going to teach everybody right now, we're going to do it together, a $20 trick that'll cost you $20 a month, ChatGPT plus, right? So I'm going to do it right now with you. This is a trick on how I scale myself, right? So I'm going to open the ChatGPT app on my phone, on my iPhone here, and I'm going to just turn on the audio thing. Now I have a thread, because ChatGPT can remember the conversation. I have a thread that I use every single day, and there's a Reddit sub called TIL, or Today I Learned, right? And I'm going to show you how this is really valuable for scaling yourself. Very specific thing that I do and how you can get value from it, right? So I'll just do one really quick for you. Today I learned that I was doing all these fancy different automations with Zapier and all these different AI tools. And what I realized was I wasn't focused enough on just the basic, simple core idea. One of the things I want to get better at is how I can look at all the chaos, all the mess, all the information, and just figure that out. I just hit stop. So that was the Today I Learned. So it's going to transcribe it automatically, and I'm going to hit that. Now, what I didn't tell the audience, and I'll tell them right now, is I started that prompt out by saying, you are an expert performance and business coach. You've been doing executive coaching for 15 years. You've read the top Wall Street Journal best-selling and New York Times best-selling books on business. And what you're going to do is you're going to listen to my Today I Learned entries every single day. And after I share those, you're going to round up the patterns that you see coming up, and you're going to output for those from me in a bulleted list. So now what I do is I've got this on my phone, and I've got this on, because I can obviously go into it on my browser as well with ChatGPT. And I have a document, which is just an Apple Notes document on my phone, because again, simple is better. I have fancy tools, but the funny thing about the tool maker is you go get fancy and crazy about productivity, but then you really come back to the beginning, and it's the simple tool. The basic Notes app on Apple is like one of the best apps there, right? So I gave you that example because what that helped me do, Robert, is by setting up that really simple prompt, which I just read to you in the audience, by every day sharing what I've learned. And then at the end of every week, what I do is, this is the stuff I wanted to achieve this week. This is the things I did not achieve this week. This is the things that I did achieve this week. So I end every week with the way that I begin every week, which is looking back and looking forward. And that's what helped me realize, okay, now it's time to make a hire, because I'm spending too much time going back in the day. Use an example, right? Back in the day when Facebook first opened up their ad marketplace, I had to teach myself how to make Facebook ads, right? Now I've got teams of people that do that on my behalf, right? But back in the day, I needed to figure out how to generate leads, how to do SEO. So I'm like reading books, I'm Googling stuff. The way that I look at things now is by reflecting on where my calendar goes and the things I'm doing every single week. Now I'm using these fancy tools to help me get back to basics, to say, these are all the things you're learning. And then what do I do with that, right? Then I use those learnings to then create social media content, which I also use AI to help me with. And that helps me to generate leads and pass leads to the different businesses that I own. I think I have like 7 or 8 businesses that I have ownership in at this point. not including the angel investments, but just like actual businesses. And I say that not to get off on a tangent, but rather to say like for $20 a month, you basically just bought yourself a multi-$1,000 business coach by just doing that. And the app just transcribes everything. So I'm just talking to it and it's helping me remind me, right? I'll go out on a walk and I'm like, hey, I'm struggling with this problem right now where I can't really figure out how to grow leads, or I can't really figure out how to do this particular thing. I didn't have that 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I had to test, I had to learn, I had to optimize, and I had to tinker. Nowadays, you can leverage tools like ChatGPT. And again, be careful with what it tells you. Always fact check stuff, right? It could hallucinate at times. But it's really the basics that help you get to the next level. It's not the really fancy stuff. And that's just what I've come to is, as an entrepreneur, your job is not to be the specialist. Your job is to be the generalist. As an entrepreneur and a business builder, your job is not to be the lead violinist in the orchestra. Your job is to be the conductor. Your job is to lead the symphony. And I think that was where I got tripped up 15, 20 years ago, is I thought I had to be everything. I was the designer. I was the coder. I was the business development guy. I was doing the finances. Then I realized, okay, what was it costing me every month to do the finances? What was my time worth to me if I could actually go and serve that on a client? And the first step was I had to get out of doing that admin work, right? Which is hire a finance person. I had to get out of doing that operations work. I had to hire, at the time, an office manager back when we still had offices, right? I had to figure out, okay, I'm getting all this coding work, but if I'm doing all the coding, then I don't have any time to be solving my clients' creative problems. So then I had to hire a coder. So it's really the number one kind of learn thing that I learned there was like, the faster you can get yourself out of the chair and get somebody else into it, the faster you can create more value for the business. And I think that the one thing that every business owner needs to learn how to do is you got to learn how to sell your services, and you got to learn how to lead and inspire people. And that was a mistake that, honestly, Robert, that's 5 years worth of hard work. I just shared you in the audience in 5 minutes, right? It took me 5 years to come to that because my ego got in the way. I thought I knew it all. I thought I had to do it all. And when I started to let go and I started to really like trust people and realize what happened, we went from like $0 to $250,000 a year to $2 million a year and $4 million a year, $5 million a year. And then before you know it, we're a 7-8 figure business, right? So I think that's where understanding where you're going and measuring it's super important, and reflecting on it, because it's super easy. Like, I don't know if you feel this, Robert, I'm sure the audience does, where it's Friday afternoon, you're like, oh my God, what did I do this week? And if you don't document the journey, and that's my biggest regret, Robert, is I didn't document the journey. Like nowadays I'm doing these voice notes with ChatGPT, or I use tools like Otter AI to do it, right? But document, because then you can on it, because the mind tricks you, right? We lie to ourselves, not intentionally, because our egos get in the way. And I think that reflection is what made me go from good to great. And I mean that in a very, very prolific way. So that is ultimately some actionable advice. If anybody wants to talk to me about how I'm using ChatGPT, I can nerd out with them. I can, send you prompts and all that kind of stuff. But the principles, the basics are what matter most, right? It's those quotes that you have on the wall, or those affirmations, Robert, that you just got back from it. So that's what I would focus on.
That's huge, and I completely agree with you that those some of the hacks, they can really be a distraction, and they can only just have a very small, minuscule impact on our business. And the low-hanging fruit, those fundamentals, are right there. And are we really doing it? Are we really monitoring our traffic? Are we really building a list? Are we really hiring someone to run the ads? Are we really hiring a coder instead of it taking up all of our time? And so it solves so many problems in so many ways, right? Because I completely agree with you, this whole problem of you don't give yourself enough credit, right? And you don't have this list of your accomplishments. You have this to-do list in the future, but you don't have a record of what you've done and what you've learned, and you might not even be aware of some of these problems. And how can you problems if you don't even know what they are? And so and we've all heard about these things like journaling, but that can be really lonely and really time consuming and doesn't necessarily get you to these conclusions. And so you're really onto something here, Pete, of having the ChatGPT where I use it as well, and I love the icon where you can just talk into it and it talks back to you. And so that's an amazing prompt, is that they make them act as a coach. And I'm going to have to go back and look at the recording and steal that prompt and use it, and just use that on a daily basis and keep feeding it the today I learned. That way I can have a record and I can also have the responses from it. And there's so much goodness in it, right? Because just by you verbalizing and speaking this out, what do they call it? Like the rubber duck technique, where you explain your problem to a rubber duck, and just because you put it in a sentence structure, you might even solve the problem. But even if you don't, ChatGPT gives you these trends, gives you these summaries, gives you these bullet points, and just kind of talks back to you and helps you out to where you need to go, which is, as you said, to lead and inspire people, so that way you can scale, that way you're not the bottleneck, that way you're going to a good speed, and you're just kind of, you're building this business that can actually make a difference, that can actually change lives, instead of being a glorified job. And that's what we're all about here when we're talking about scaling secrets. So if someone is really impressed and amazed with what you said, you mentioned about how they can talk to you about these AI prompts, but then there's also the possibility that they can talk to you about what they can do for your business. So if someone got a really incredible, amazing taste of your zone of genius and what you have to share with us, and they want to take the next step with you, where should they go? How do they find out about your podcast, your company, etc.? What's the call to action?
Yeah, I mean, I think my call to action is I just want to see people be able to unlock their innate curiosity and creativity, which we're all born with. And it somehow along the way, life kind of beats it out of us, whether it's school systems or family, friends, whatever, coworkers, bosses. If people are moved by what I said, I mean, the best way to kind of reward me for that is to just, tune into the content I'm publishing, right? You sign up for my free newsletter at petesenna.com, or, if you need marketing stuff, have a look at my team, digitalsurgeons.com. We do incredible work. But at the end of the day, really, like, I'm not here to sell anybody anything. I just want to share my journey, because ultimately, like, these are the things I wish I had. If I had that today I learned trick 10 years ago, I would have already had my book done, which I'm now working on, right? If I had that today I learned trick 5 years ago, I wouldn't have made some of the big mistakes I made, because sometimes, like, language is how we make sense of the world. So I just want to urge everybody, like, whether you are out on the treadmill running, you can record your thoughts. Like, journaling doesn't have to be you sitting on a meditation chair, like, like doing some Zen meditation. I'm a big meditator, but like, everyone can find 5 minutes to just catalog their thoughts, especially now with all these tools to do that, where it's just like speaking to the void, speak to the rubber duck, but just hopefully the rubber duck has a microphone on it, right? And I think that's just what I would say is how people can get in touch with me. Again, if this resonated with you, what I would say is tell me what was you, so that the next time I'm on Robert's show or somebody else's show, I can cover the things that are going to be valuable, because I just want to be the change that I seek in the world. And that's ultimately what I'm here to do.
Wonderful. You're here to add value, and then if we want to then opt in to more of your information, then that is what your social media is for, and that's what your website is for, and then we will get bit with the bug and we'll want more, and then we'll want to go and hire you and your team. And so I'm sure that people who are watching and listening, they're curious about the implementation of this sort of today I learned ChatGPT, and I love how you said that it ends up becoming your social media content. So you need to go to PeteSenna.com, that's PeteSena.com, and then add Pete on social media, add him on LinkedIn. That way you can see this content come to life, and you can look at these little posts and be like, oh, you know what? Probably 3 weeks ago, he was updating his ChatGPT business coach about this, and that made for a really helpful lesson. And then that's something that we can all do, of not just being selfish, but also give back, right? We can learn things, we can implement things, but then if these these trends make a lot of sense, then we can pass them on, and then that grows our following, grows our content, people find us, and then that becomes a lead if they then join our list or subscribe to us or follow us or just want to know more. And if you want to know more, then Pete's agency is digitalsurgeons.com, and check out what they have to offer you there as well. So Pete, so many amazing lessons to speak about with you today. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Appreciate you having me on.